Hello everyone, welcome to this video lecture on how to create a teaching plan. What we're going to talk about first up is what teaching plans are and why we use them and how they can be seen as cycles of continuous improvement. Then we're going to get into the actual writing of the plan, setting the context, how to go about it, and a checklist, some common planning mistakes, the actual lessons, and we end with some input on IB, International Baccalaureate, as we have a lot of students who follow that program. So what is a teaching plan? A teaching plan is basically a project plan. It is a guideline that helps you reach your goals. Decisions that you make during a project should be evaluated against effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness is defined in terms of how well you reach your goal, and efficiency is about how much input do you need to reach your goals. Next to this video, I've also created a short video on a fictional student, Julia, for whom we have two teaching plans, one for English and one for science. And of course, when looking at that, you can have your own student in mind and see how to apply these things in your own teaching plans. Why do we use teaching plans? There are many reasons. I found some nice quotes, amongst others by Abraham Lincoln, about preparation. And basically the idea of preparation is that preparation is needed if you want to go from good to excellent. You cannot be excellent without preparation. A teaching plan helps you prepare. Next to that, it also helps create insights for everybody involved, making sure that the goals are realistic, making sure that people have realistic expectations of your tutoring work. The idea with a teaching plan is that it's actually not that much work. Once you know how to do it, it becomes very easy, so the benefits become quite large while the investment gets smaller and smaller. Very important to add is that teaching plans have priority. If you don't have a teaching plan and get into your lessons straight away, you risk that you lose effectiveness and efficiency. While teaching, you can see the process as a kind of continuous cycle of improvement. We set out with setting the right context, then we determine, okay, what do we want to reach? Then we identify what do we need to reach these goals. Then we create our plan. That's basically writing down the things we determined in the first 3 steps. Then during our lessons, we continuously monitor and evaluate because things change. And if things need to be changed, we do that. And afterwards, again, check the context and go through the steps again. When setting the context, which is the first step, we need to check who are the people involved. First up, obviously, it's going to be you and the student. Second up, it is the parents and the school. So that's more kind of like the external context. Last up, we have Astrea, who has a supporting role. It's important to remember that we deal with people. So what can we influence? Their attitudes. So first up, for the parents and the school, what we need is support and good communication, because everybody's involved and everybody has the same objective, and that is helping the student. Then if you look at the student, well, what kind of attitude would we like to have there? A positive work attitude and good communication as well. It's very important that the student feels comfortable with you so that he or she can voice anything they need from you to help them. And what's important for yourself is that you're able to see what is my role in this process. How am I influencing the results of the lessons? If my student doesn't understand, to which extent can that be attributed to me? Next to that, what's very important is that you're able to actually adapt what you need to change. Realizing you need to change is one thing, being able to actually adapt is another. These two elements are critical for any teacher. Make sure you have a clear idea of what you need from everybody involved, and then also understand what do I have at the moment. If these two things are the same, you're good. If they're not, you need to make some changes to make sure that they are. So how to go about creating a teaching plan? Well, what you do first is you look at what do I actually want to reach. What are your goals and objectives? And then you look at, well, where am I at now? Or better, where is the student at now? And what you then will get is inevitably a gap. So you can see it as a kind of gap that you need to bridge. And crossing that bridge takes time. There are two main approaches to get from the current situation to reaching your actual goal. And the first is proficiency. What does that mean? It means that you check a student's performance against some standardized measure. Most schools use this method. Another thing you can do is to check growth. So you basically measure a student's performance at a certain time and then check the performance at another time and see the difference. And hopefully it's a positive difference, meaning that the student has grown. What we try to do with Astrea is combine both, but the focus will be on proficiency. And that's mainly because that's where the focus lies in schools. When actually writing your plan, what you can do is use a kind of checklist. So the main focus of your plan, of your checklist, is first up the scope. What do I actually need to do and how long do these things take? Then you check the milestones, because if you have a long-term objective, it's very hard to reach that in one time. You would need to do certain things at certain times to get to that point. And what's also very important to remember is, well, what do I need to do first before I can do another thing? So there's an order in things. What you then do is you break it down. You write it down in a kind of schematic. When do I need to do what and how long does it take? Another part of what you want to write down is the risks that you have that may negatively influence you or your student reaching the goals that you set out. You want to check if you actually can do all the work that you want to do. You also want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and that the requirements are met. So what can be a requirement? A requirement could be that you know that your student is very lively, very energetic, and that you need to engage her in a certain way. That means that you as a tutor need a certain approach. And you can ask yourself, well, do I have it in me to approach the student in that way? Or am I just, for example, a really calm person? And is the fit not actually optimal? Another very practical example might be that there's a quiet space to work, that the student is always on time, that the student always finished their homework, etc. When assessing these risks, you want to look at, well, how big is the impact and how likely is it going to happen? And you want to give these things a number. And logically, when both numbers are high, you need to do something about it. The main idea of checking the risks is that you want to focus on the lessons and not anything else. So let's look at some common planning mistakes. A thing could be that you haven't specified your goal, you didn't break down the tasks, you haven't made a schematic of things, and what that will lead to very likely is that you will make a lot of mistakes. Because if you keep everything in your head, it remains fuzzy. Another thing could be that you've underestimated the amount of work that you need to do, and these things will lead to problems with time. Lastly, what you need to realize is that planning is just a guideline. It is not a goal. It helps you decide what to do at certain points, but it's not that you need to stick to the plan at all costs. So for every situation, you need different things, or you need to pay attention to different things, and you need to be able to do that by yourself and not just follow a recipe book. Here I have an example that I actually use in my own work. I adapted it a little bit, so it incorporates some fictional planning of math lessons. But this is an example of how you could write down things. You don't have to use the same schematic. You can even just use a pencil and a piece of paper. But it's very important to write it down, to get it out of the fuzziness of your head and put it on paper so that you can more clearly see what is going on and what you need to do to reach your goals. And then after our planning efforts comes the fun part, the actual lessons. You have your guidelines, you have your boundaries, you know what you need to do to reach your goals, but during actual lessons, things may change. And that is not a problem. You can just improvise, you can just go with the flow, because your teaching plan will make sure that you stay on track. During your lessons, it's important that you regularly update everybody involved. We do this by writing progress reports. This is not only valuable for others, it's also valuable for yourself. Again, because if you write down things, you get it out of the fussiness and will help you see things more clearly. So if you need to critically reflect on yourself or adapt the way you do things, it helps that you've written things down. It's also important to monitor because things change. Your goals might change, your context might change, your requirements might change. So let's do a quick recap. When preparing to create your teaching plan, you want to first look at the context, then determine what the goals and objectives are and what the current situation is. And then what that will lead to is a roadmap of how do I get from point A to point B. Make sure you check all the requirements. Is everything in place? Can I actually go on this journey and reach my goals? And then you write down everything. It can be very concise. It doesn't have to be any more than 2 pages, and you can just use the template that we have for the progress report. And then during the lessons, you use the same template to write progress reports and monitor your progress. In the other video, I will show you how you can do that. If during the monitoring we see that we actually need to change something because otherwise we won't reach our goals or our goals have changed, we sit down, we think about the teaching plan again. You don't have to go over all the details, but it's important to go through all the steps again. So starting with the context. And here you can already see the power of repetition, because if you start with the context again, it wouldn't take you as long as it took you the first time. And the same goes for when you write your second teaching plan. It doesn't take as much time as it took the first time. And then what will happen is that you become proficient at creating teaching plans so that we get all of the benefits for a fraction of the costs. Lastly, I want to quickly talk about the International Baccalaureate. This is a program that differs from what you normally see in schools. The idea is that students learn how to learn, so they reflect on their own process, the same way you reflect on your process as a teacher. You can think of students not being able to understand calculus, for example, at some point in time, and then in the future they do. And the idea is that they actually are conscious or aware about what happened during the process to make them understand it. This is a very valuable insight because what it does is it helps you become an independent thinker, an independent creator of knowledge. It's very similar to what you learn at the university, and it's actually something we naturally do, but at normal schools or at regular schools, what happens is that we come into a system where we learn, oh, there's one good answer, it's at the end of the book, and we get rewarded if we get it correctly and punished if not. But the world obviously is very complex, and there are multiple answers to the same question. And some answers might be better and some answers might be worse. It's not that there's one good answer and the rest is incorrect, for example. They also link their teaching to practice. 99% of the knowledge we have is embedded in practice. Knowledge ultimately should serve some purpose to make our lives better. And to really understand how things work, it's best to see how they work in practice. Then you get a clear idea of how things actually work. Normally this happens when we finish our studies and we go work. And the manager tells us, forget everything you were taught, we're going to show you how things actually work. The nice thing about IB is that they already incorporate these things in their secondary and primary schools. What IB does is not just window dressing. They actually evaluate students, for example, on how they reflect on their own learning process. So in that sense, it's a very valuable initiative, and I actually hope to see more of these things in our schools. Please let me know your thoughts. I really appreciate your feedback, and if all goes well, perhaps there will be more videos to follow.